I am looking forward to the conversation you and I are going to have tonight. It really is going to open your eyes to a whole new idea about the Grand Canyon and what it really means. You're going to leave tonight realizing God's word is absolutely true. The scars of planet Earth point us to the scarred hands of Jesus Christ. You're going to love tonight. I want to share with you, as we get into this whole scarred earth issue, I want to share with you something that I think, well, it's actually the intro to a movie I did called Scarred Earth. And so I want to show you this little intro to this movie. I want to show you this, and then it's a little more than 2 minutes long, and then we're going to jump into this conversation.
Hello, welcome to Grand Canyon National Park.
Nice to have you guys.
You got the Grand Canyon behind you. How do you think the Grand Canyon formed? How do you think the Grand Canyon formed?
It was ice.
From the river. I have no idea. Humans destroyed everything.
Maybe some miracle.
The prehistoric, what are they? What do you call them? Dinosaurs?
I have no idea actually, man.
It's our
we
first
should
time.
we should have had the signs, you know.
Are you open to scientific evidence that could show that it had to be formed from a catastrophic event?
Yeah.
All right.
Does that help change your mind?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it does.
I guess when you put it that way, I can see your point.
I think so.
That was one of the best interpretations that I have heard, and I've heard a lot of them.
It's one of the 7 natural wonders of the world. It's visited by more than 6 million people every year, and it can be seen from space. Today, we're going on a journey of discovery. How did the canyon form? And what does it tell us about the past, the present, and the future? The answers could change your life. You're going to love the information presented today. It's going to give you a whole new understanding of the Grand Canyon. My guest is none other than Nate Loper, who is one of the directors of Canyon Ministry out there in Arizona. Nate, how you doing today?
Doing fantastic, Eric. How are you doing, my friend?
Blessed by the Almighty, just like you. All right, so you've been giving tours of the Grand Canyon for quite a number of years now, and you're convinced that this scar on the planet should point us to the scarred hands of Christ. I want us to unpackage that today. Real quick, though, tell people about Canyon Ministries and what it is you guys do.
So Canyon Ministries is our organization here. We do tours of the Grand Canyon. Yeah, so we run tours up at the Grand Canyon. We've been up there now. This is our 24th year on operation at the Grand Canyon. And we do daily rim tours up there along the south rim of the canyon, 4 hours or 8 hour long tours. We also do daily hiking tours along the rim of the canyon, as well as down into the depths of the canyon, kind of on a 3-mile round trip hike that we do. We also do river trips, 4, 7, and 9 day whitewater rafting trips through the depths of the Grand Canyon. And starting just this fall, we actually launched a brand new aspect of the ministry, now going on 24 years in operation at the Grand Canyon. We're now doing a lot of backpacking trips through the Grand Canyon. So we just published some dates just recently on our website of brand new backpacking opportunities that you can have not only into the Grand Canyon, but other great places like a Coyote Gulch up in Utah, beautiful, amazing slot canyon. And so it's exciting to be able to share God's amazing creation with so many people. Like you said in that video, about 6 million people a year come to see the Grand Canyon. And we're not the only ones doing it. Our friend Russ Miller also does tours up there at the Grand Canyon. And I know that, Eric, you've been a part of that for a number of years. We wish that there were a dozen tour companies up here proclaiming God's creation to the world, because there's no place like it on the planet that I believe features, the flood geology and an idea of the scarred earth, so to speak, right?
You're exactly right. You're at a place where you're seeing at so many different levels, from the almost the heights of the mountains over there, all the way down to the depths, way down in the canyon, of what's going on. And so you really do. It's an incredible. It's a great outdoor lab to do amazing study into God's creation and the truth of what it points to. Nate, let's jump into this. And You take us on a journey, on a different view tour of the Grand Canyon, would you?
So, one of the things that we see when it comes to Grand Canyon, of course, are these layers that we have. We have roughly 4,000 feet of what we believe are water-laid sedimentary layers that we see at the Grand Canyon, from the Tapete sandstone all the way up to the Kaibab limestone, kind of the rim rock of the Grand Canyon. 4,000 feet of horizontal sedimentary layers made mostly of sandstone, limestone, and shale. And these layers show us, by the scientific evidence, some of the erosional properties, as far as some of what we find in them, that these, we believe, were laid down and deposited catastrophically and by water. We find fossil evidence within their broken, shattered fossil communities, as if these environments, from the ocean environments and onto the land, were propelled across the continents violently in a catastrophe. We find broken and churned up, what we call pre-flood, ocean bed rock that's found within things like the Tapete sandstone and other formations. I mean, we see evidence of a massive amount of deposition, you might say, of what the global flood in Noah's day would do. And so sediment layer upon sediment layer, we believe, are brought in during this year-long biblical flood that the Bible describes in Genesis 6, 7, and 8. And so, when it comes to the Grand Canyon, there are a couple different models and ideas of how people look at that. We compare and contrast sometimes a couple different models. For the naturalistic perspective, they believe in millions and millions of years, slowly added up for about 500 million years. The Tapete sandstone all the way up to the Kaibab limestone was depositing these sedimentary rock units and layers as oceans moved over the continents, slowly deposited particle by particle and sand grain on sand grain. Eventually the ocean receded and the land kind of became dry, solid rock. And then that process repeated perhaps up to 17 different times across the North American continent. Millions and millions of years in the making. Now, we look at it very differently because we believe in the Bible, first and foremost, as our foundation, right, Eric? So we look at God's word as the foundation. And in that Bible, we see there are some fantastic events of catastrophic proportions, unlike anything we see happening in today's world. So the idea of slow, gradual, uniformitarian processes do not make sense when you look at a global flood event the Bible describes. When you understand what this flood is all about, you realize this is the largest geological change the world has seen before or since, a major catastrophic event that took place. Even as the flood receded off the continents, we would have tremendous amounts of water, draining off the continents and eroding landscapes and formations. We have, sheet erosion as water is pulling a sediment off the topmost layers. And we have a tremendous evidence, I believe, all around the world of a global flood event. If you think about it, the world is covered by water-laid sediment. Think about that. It doesn't take long. Water-laid sediment,
I say
you don't have to be a genius
time,
to
Nate. I say
figure
that all
out
the
that
time.
means.
I'm like, guys, do you realize 70% of the Earth's, land surface is covered by sedimentary layers, and sedimentary means laid down by water? I mean, come on, what is this? It's yelling at us here.
Yes, absolutely. And so, I mean, we don't have to talk a whole lot about the layers tonight, because really the purpose of tonight is the scar that we're looking at, right? And if you think about it, the Grand Canyon is almost like a giant layered cake. You have lots of layers. And if you're making a cake, first of all, you make the layers, you bake those layers, then you get a chance to cut down into those layers and enjoy that cake, right? And it's kind of like what the Grand Canyon is. The process we believe to deposit and, to lay down these layers was the global flood. But then after that, after they firmed up and set up for a moment, then this canyon was carved out. And that's kind of what we really want to talk about tonight, is the carving of this canyon, this giant scar within the earth, and why we have this canyon.
Hey, real
Now,
quick,
Aaron,
give me like 2 facts to show, how do we know those layers were not laid down slowly? How do we know instead that they had to be laid down quickly? Give me a couple of scientific facts on that.
So one of the greatest things, I think, Eric, is when you look at the contact points, the boundaries between these layers, they do not show long periods of time of slow erosion into the surface of the landscape. For example, between the Redwall limestone and Muav limestone, between other contact points, we have these unconformities. We have periods where standard geology would say there are perhaps millions of years in between when one layer was deposited and then another layer got brought in and was deposited on top. Now, if that were the case, we should expect to find millions of years worth of surface erosion, of channels and valleys and gullies. We should expect to find plants or animals living on the surface at that point. predominantly, as we look through the Grand Canyon, that's not what we find. We find very little major erosion between these contact points. Rather, we find knife edge boundaries in between them. So to me, that tells me that these layers were brought on quickly, one after another, without time for slow, gradual erosion. They were brought in rapidly, deposited one on top of another.
Wow.
The other big evidence, I think, when it comes to looking at a global flood event, are some of the fossils, as I mentioned, some of the fossils we find that are broken and shattered. And, coral structures, coral's a pretty strong thing in itself. It's almost like a rock. And the coral we find at the Grand Canyon is not whole and unique. If it was sitting here at the ocean floor and it was slowly covered up by particle accumulation, then when we see it exposed, it should be fairly intact, right?
Yeah.
But that's not how we find coral at the Grand Canyon or anywhere around the world, really. What we find are broken, shattered pieces. Most of the coral pieces we find in the Grand Canyon from the top to the bottom are no bigger than your thumb. They're broken, they're shattered, as if they were thrown upon the continents in a tumultuous, catastrophic event like the Bible describes.
So you could almost see, since we find these pieces, you could almost see these layers being laid down by water as they're being literally pummeled and tumbled into an area, and the water's going around. That's interesting. Okay.
Absolutely,
okay.
yeah.
That's good. I mean, like right now, I'm going, I may be easy to believe something, but that's solid, man. I mean, even if you were skeptical, the fact that every single one of these layers is a knife edge contact point, there's no erosion in between the layers, there's no root structures. I'm going, that's genius. That in itself is enough. But we got more time to fill, so let's hit some more, buddy.
All right. So one of my other favorite features that we see here at the Grand Canyon is the rock layers themselves. For example, like that Tapete sandstone at the very bottom of the Grand Canyon. That Tapete sandstone is not just found covering the Grand Canyon at the bottom. That same layer of rock, that same Tapete sandstone actually covers most of the entire North America or across the United States. We can trace out that same Tapete sandstone across North Africa into southern Israel, into Jordan, up into Europe. I mean, we can see a massive, wide distribution of this water-laid sediment. So again, you begin to think about it, there was a pretty big global flood, we believe. So then what comes next, Eric? After we have the layers laid down, after we have the cake layers, and they're baked, how do we carve this Grand Canyon? And that has been the question for a long, long time. Geologists, we've been studying the Grand Canyon for the past 150 years.
Wow.
And yet to this day, there is no consensus or agreement among all geologists on how the Grand Canyon was formed. Lots of different theories have been proposed over the years. Some of them from a lot of water bursting through, like John Newberry first talked about in the 1800s, saying this looked like a catastrophic water spill through here, to the Colorado River slowly slicing down through the Kaibab Plateau as the plateau was lifted up around it. That was proposed especially by guys like Major John Wesley Powell. Other ideas of Colorado River formation when it comes to stream capture theories of various forms. But even to this day, there's no agreement among geologists. In fact, I was at the Grand Canyon National Park doing a tour myself about 4 years ago now. And we were in one of the geology museums up there, and one of the rangers, she was getting ready to give her talk to everybody gathered, kind of a ranger talk that afternoon. And so she kind of gathered everyone around in the geology museum around a big map we have there. And she started off her talk by saying this. So in this room, behind me, all the pictures and everything, all the displays, this was built about 8 years ago. Since then, we've actually come up with a lot of new ideas about Grand Canyon formation. So what I'm about to share with you right now might sound a little bit different than what you're going to read right over there, just to give you guys a heads up. And I was listening in, I thought, wow, even in 8 years, they're still trying to figure this out. And it's true, as scientists, geologists, we're still trying to figure out the Grand Canyon. We're still piecing things together. Even in creation science, in our community, we're still working on active research, studying the Grand Canyon, studying these places. But, one of the theories that I tend to look at for the formation of the Grand Canyon has to do with a massive lake system, we believe, that was left behind, that was sitting here out and basically in the Colorado Plateau. And so if you see in this picture here, it kind of shows you a little bit of an outline of kind of what that lake system might have looked like. One of those lakes down there at the bottom, you can see called Hopi Lake, originally and most oftentimes called Lake Betahochi. Above that to the top, you see Grand Lake, and there's actually a third lake called Lake Vernal or Lake Uinta that goes up into Utah as well. But a massive lake system that we see that covers kind of the four corners of Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, and Arizona.
Now, just for you guys watching, those lakes are not there right now. So
they are not.
All that blue is land right now. It's not a lake, just so you know, all right?
That is correct. these show us where the lakes used to be at. And that's been mapped out and traced out. Now, geologists, they've proposed this back in the 1800s. I personally know many geologists to this day, creation geologists and non-creation geologists, not even Christian geologists that I know of, that also hold to the same idea of a lake spillover or breach dam. And we look at this lake system, and one of the evidences we see of this lake existing is the kind of shoreline environment. You can see it, with satellite topography, even things like Google Earth. You can see the outline shores of these lakes in this area. And these lakes were held in the middle of what we call the Colorado Plateau. Now, the Colorado Plateau you see outlined here in the middle, this Colorado Plateau is not exactly flat on top. It's actually shaped like a giant bowl, like a big, ditch with a big rim of mountains all around it. So naturally, Eric, like a giant bowl, where does water collect when you pour it into the bowl?
In the middle.
Right in the middle. So in the past, as you see here, the kind of white dotted outline that goes around the lakes, you can see part of that Colorado Plateau, a giant bowl with a massive, lake system that would fill up into there. Now, we believe that perhaps some of this water started off as trapped behind floodwaters from Noah's flood. When the floodwaters receded off the continents, it would leave behind puddles and pockets of water all over the planet. And then for a few hundred years after that, we believe water continued to fill up this lake basin, filling up higher and higher and higher and higher. Now, with a rim of mountains all around it, basically uplifted land all around it, there is no place for this water to go until somehow there is a breach that forms. Now, as I've been sharing this picture with a few of you guys, some of you have been looking at it, you've seen some of the lakes and the areas up here, but few people realize where the Grand Canyon is. You can see it right here. Here is the entire 277 miles of Grand Canyon. Now, when you look at the size of these lakes compared to the size of the Grand Canyon, it makes the Grand Canyon look like a teeny tiny scratch in the earth, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So we're looking at a massive amount of water. And we know that massive amounts of water have done catastrophic things, like Lake Missoula up there in the channeled scablands in eastern Washington, where we believe, geologists believe that there was a massive, ice age lake that was held in place by some glaciers, and it breached through, and all this water combined with some other lakes, and it traveled westward rapidly, scouring the landscape, scouring all kinds of geological features, and even carving the Columbia River Gorge rapidly as all that water spilled off there.
You're looking at this going, this had to be a massive amount of water. There's no other way to explain this. So incredible.
Absolutely. So like known features in geology, we also believe that the Grand Canyon itself was carved in a very similar process from this massive lake system that was sitting out here that basically encompassed the four corners of Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, and Arizona, like I said.
Wow.
Here you can see kind of the size of this water. Now, over the years, this is not just a brand new idea. Like I said, this was proposed all the way back in the 1800s. They identified at least Lake Betahoche down at the very bottom there, and it's still being proposed today. But basically, when you look at the landscape and the map here, you can kind of see here's a visual map of this. And here you kind of fill in where the blue is at. Basically, it helps us identify where things, especially like water, was in the past. I mean, because where there's water, there's cultures and civilization. We have a saying out here in the desert Southwest and Grand Canyon country, water is life. And so where you can find ancestral lakes and streams and river features, there's oftentimes a good indication you're going to find a civilization or a culture there or some kind of archaeological site. Nowadays, we drive through the desert, a lot of stuff is dried up. There's no trace of it on the surface easily, but things like satellite imagery, GIS, remote surveys and things like that, we can actually start to pinpoint some great things in archaeology. So we're not only using it here in the Southwest, but we're using that technology in Egypt and in the South, west of here, but also way over there in the desert landscapes. It's amazing new technology that we have access to these days, which is fantastic. So one of the things I have access to is the ability to actually tell this computer program to show me water at a certain level. In other words, hey, if I want to see if we had water that was in a lake and this lake filled up to 5,800 feet or 6,200 feet or whatever it is, I can plug in those numbers and say, show me the water. And what it does is it populates that water feature on the landscape at the same level all around the landscape. And so if you start to look at this, you begin to actually match up shoreline environments at the same terrain level throughout this landscape. You can actually match up the shoreline. You can see shoreline erosional features. There are places out here where we find, where these waters had filled up. And so when you begin to go back and forth, even now, you can kind of see the outline already just in this simple image here. So then you could take stuff like this and you can plug it into bigger pieces of software like Google Earth, where you can actually get some visual imagery. And so this kind of shows you the outline. The yellow is the Colorado Plateau. In the middle here is the overlay of where that water was at. And this is kind of based on the earlier image of where the lakes have been at and where they've been proposed for the past 30 years by geologists. But recent studies that we're doing right now out there actually show us that the lake was probably even bigger than just this. It wasn't separate lakes. Initially, we believe it was actually one giant, massive super lake. And so we're looking at, we're covering multiple states with a huge body of water. Current estimates right now and what we're researching, still, again, like I said, still researching, still developing, but current estimates place this volume of water at roughly perhaps 5,000 to 6,000 cubic miles in total water volume.
All right, give me a comparison. Is there any lake that you can compare? Because that's a lot of water.
That's a lot of water. That's roughly equivalent to all 5 Great Lakes combined. The Great Lakes total combined about 55,000 cubic miles worth of water. We're looking at roughly the same volume of water of all 5 Great Lakes sitting out here in the middle of this giant bowl. Now, the interesting thing, Eric, when you take a look at this water, you find the bottom of the lake, right? Okay, so that's the lowest point of the lake.
Right.
You find where the shoreline environment rises.
Let me pause. To find out these heights, are you really, you guys, you can put in and find out basically how high can we go before there is an outlet where the water would spill out around? Is that, you can literally say, okay,
exactly right.
Try it at 6,000. What's it at? 6,050, 6,100, 6,100. You can literally go and figure out when would it not hold the water anymore.
That's exactly right. So as a giant bowl, you can realize where's the rim of that bowl before water would either spill over or no longer be able to be contained. And that level that we estimate from what we see and depending on the rays of the landscape and things like that, but roughly 6,725 feet is what we come up with at this point.
Above sea level. So that would be the
level.
top of the bowl, 6,500 feet above sea level.
Now the bottom of that bowl, and look at places like Cameron, Arizona, near the bottom of that bowl, the bottom of that bowl is roughly about 4,200 feet. So you go to the bottom of that bowl, the bottom of that lake, to the rim of that bowl, we're talking over 2,000 feet deep for a lake system.
So it'd be like going fishing and having fishing line to, if you're going to fish for something at the bottom. Oh my goodness.
That's huge. Yeah, it is huge, but it's not really that big when you look at the entire Colorado Plateau and realize that we've actually made some pretty good sized lakes from, the same water system, basically, like Lake Powell and Lake Mead, 400 to 600 feet deep, those lakes are. If we dammed up or had an entire Colorado Plateau bowl to fill up, you could easily have a 2,000 foot deep lake. And not only do we, so we're talking about, so here you can see a little visual image of what I'm talking about. This shows us the lake system over the entire, continent or entire United States here. We're talking about a massive amount of water. And as we zoom in here, you can see kind of where that lake was at. In the yellow, again, the Colorado Plateau. And so here we have overlaid with the water. And as we kind of rotate down, you'll be able to see just how big this lake system is. Try to notice that little tiny scar of the Grand Canyon over there to the left. It's really hard to see.
Does your mouse go over it? Can you point it out? I didn't know if it would.
Right there.
Oh yeah, it does. Yeah.
There you go.
Grand Canyon is.
So we're Grand Canyon right over here. We're talking about a massive amount of water falling up these lakes. And then as we pull back out from here from this animation we made, you can see, boom, here's the Grand Canyon. Not all that big of a 277 mile canyon that's 10 to 18 miles wide and over a mile deep compared to the whole lakes.
Wow.
But again, when we look at this, we not only see evidence in the shoreline environment, but we find evidence of this lake system in what's left behind where the water was. We have a lake bottom deposit, especially out there in kind of Lake Betahoche, known as the Betahoche Formation. And this is understood by even secular geologists that there was a lake system out there. Now, this Betahoche Formation, they're going to naturally assign, as you see here, millions of years of deposit age to it. But what I want you to notice is the Chinle Formation directly underneath it, naturalistic, they assign that age about 208 to 225 million years ago when that was deposited. And then the Betahoche Formation only 4 to 8 million years ago. Yeah. In other words, between these 2 points, they are vastly different in what they say in age. And of course, from a biblical creation flood perspective, we look at it very differently. There's not the millions of years in between there. However, what it shows us is that this Betahochi Formation, even from a secular perspective, almost a blink of an eye geologically.
There is a whole lot more science. I want you to go watch the movie. You'll see some more science in there. Get on Canyon Ministries website. You'll see some more science there. You guys are going to love it. I want to end with my little conclusion, and I got permission from my friend Matt McPherson to share his poem called The Salvation Poem as we raft down the river.
Take care of us.